Welcome back to the channel. Today we dive straight into the eye of the Fairmont Crest storm as the next episode of Beyond the Gates 2025 is set to explode. Just when Bill thinks he's back in control, a small mystery crashes in, triggering shady transactions and connections that defy explanation. Jacob and Naomi face a painful question about the future of their big, healthy baby. Will it be the hope they need or the spark that burns their family down? Meanwhile, Haley and Randy quietly pull the strings, turning rumor into a weapon. Can Bill stop the trap from snapping shut, or will everyone be dragged into a spiral of chaos and despair? If you love edge of your seat twists, stay to the end, drop a like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our darkest and most grounded breakdown of the week. The week ahead at Fairmont Crest does not arrive with fireworks so much as with a slow leak of dread that no one can patch. The fault line begins, as it always seems to lately, with Bill, who has spent months convincing himself that control is a strategy rather than a drug. He believed he could recover what Haley took from him by moving faster, watching closer, spending more freely, trusting only the instincts that once made him a winner. That is how he justified turning his home and office into a maze of keycards and cameras, how he kept Danny in his orbit as both confidant and temptation, how he learned to talk about love like a contract and trust like a safe combination. He has been sprinting on a treadmill of punishment ever since he realized Haley and Randy were not a fling of boredom but a long con engineered around his tastes, his history, and his pride. The quiet anger he carries has the shape of a ledger. Every humiliation is a line item he intends to pay back with interest. What makes Bill dangerous now is not the rage, it is the clarity that comes after rage, a winter light that turns everything sharp. He has mapped out Haley's tactics with the precision of someone who finally accepts that she never improvised anything. The friendship with Naomi was acquisition disguised as empathy. The way she floated toward Jacob was not curiosity but calibration, a read on which power switches in the Dupree-adjacent circle could be flipped by sympathy, by pressure, by fear. Even the short-lived truce she offered Danny was a hinge: swing it one way and Danny becomes bait, swing it the other and Danny becomes proof that Bill is still the man Haley can control. Randy moved through all of this like the quiet pulse on a screen, impossible to track until the moment the signal spikes and the room goes silent. Yet as the week opens, a smaller thing, almost petty in scale, begins to gnaw at Bill with more force than the big betrayals. A private banker leaves a late message about irregular monthly transfers tied to an old discretionary subaccount that Bill barely remembers opening. The vendor on the receiving end is a women's health clinic in a neighboring county. The invoices are clean, the dates unremarkable, but the pattern lands like a stone in water, sending rings that touch people Bill has carefully kept in separate compartments. He finds the clinic name again buried inside a property management retainer that should have nothing to do with medical services. He recognizes a courier's name that appeared once before in a stack of trust paperwork Danny helped him audit. And then the detail that turns suspicion into obsession: the timing of the first transfer aligns eerily with the night Naomi told Jacob that life was about to expand, that the future would have a heartbeat they could both hear. Bill tells himself that coincidence is a trickster, it is Haley's favorite mask. But he also understands the arithmetic of appearances, and appearances are what this town weaponizes. If these payments suggest he has been quietly bankrolling something connected to Naomi, then Haley has the perfect fuse run straight into the sanctum of the only couple still naive enough to believe survival here comes from being good. Naomi has fought for joy with earnest hands, and Jacob has tried to gather that joy like a fragile heirloom, shielding it with promises that sound true even when truth is under siege. But Haley knows the geometry of doubt: throw the right shadow across a family portrait and the most loving faces look like strangers. Randy moves first, because Randy always moves first when the work requires a steady wrist. Anonymous files find their way to a freelance blogger who has been sniffing around Fairmont Crest for months, waiting for something that confirms his thesis that wealth is just a story about cleanup crews. The files are thin billing summaries, courier logs, long strings of numbers arranged to look like meaning, but they are arranged with elegance. The implication is more important than the fact, and the implication is simple enough to catch fire. Bill appears to be paying for something medical that touches Naomi's life in a way intimate enough to humiliate Jacob and radioactive enough to frighten Danny. This is not an accusation. It is a magnet, and it begins pulling metal filings from every private drawer. The past arrives like a hostile witness. People remember that Haley once escorted Naomi to prenatal appointments like a solemn vow binder, that she guarded Naomi's calendar with the zeal of a sister who had learned how to pray in a crisis. They recall that Bill and Naomi briefly overlapped in a philanthropic committee whose minutes were never published because the chair quit suddenly after a scandal that dimmed the lights for a week. They catalog that Danny, despite trying to rebuild her life with something steadier than adrenaline, shared space with Bill in a way that looks like motive to those who see romance as a chess opening rather than a refuge. And they remember that Jacob, for all his earnestness, kept secrets of his own about family origins he did not fully understand, secrets that Isaiah recently teased into the daylight with a key in a file and the calm cruelty of someone who claims to be a brother even as he holds a stranger's smile. Underneath all of this, Naomi slows down. It is the only option left when noise becomes environment. She moves with the care of someone who has measured the weight of her choices in the palm of her hand and found that the scale doesn't care about intention. She stops answering messages that demand explanations as if explanation is a currency the town can exchange for absolution. She watches Jacob attempt to become both shield and sword, and she feels the guilt that comes when love is not enough to stop a narrative from swallowing you whole. Naomi once thought that friendships here were scaffolding, now she sees how easily scaffolding can be reassembled into a cage. Bill decides that the only antidote to rumor is proof, and proof looks like data. And data looks like signatures and timestamps and video pulled from cold servers that do not care about shame. He leans into the old habits that made him formidable. He calls in favors from people who still owe him for the days when his generosity had a purpose beyond self-rescue. He believes that if he can show how the transfers were bait, how the clinic interfaces a forged corridor leading to Haley's favorite trapdoor, then he can rescue not just his reputation but the fragile equilibrium of a community that pretends to hate him while secretly relying on his gravity. But proof has a cost, and the first invoice arrives in the form of alienation. Danny sees the shape of the operation and recognizes the part she has been assigned without being asked. She is the one who can cut through the dull red tape with a smile that opens vaults, the one who knows which production assistant on which streaming show owes her a midnight favor and which city contractor looks the other way when passion is framed as urgency. She hates that this is her reflex. She hates that Bill knows it. And yet she steps into the role because the alternative is to watch Haley burn down the last soft place in her life and then blame her for the ashes. By midweek, the rumor has matured into narrative. The clinic thread suggests clandestine support, the property retainer implies a hush arrangement, the courier schedule lines up with days Naomi seemed too exhausted to speak. None of it proves anything. All of it proves enough. The small mystery that began as a financial itch has metastasized into a question people are afraid to say aloud. What if the baby is not what everyone believes it to be, not in the brutal biological sense but in the social sense that defines belonging here? The terror is not just paternity. It is the fear that story itself has been stolen, that the family arc Naomi and Jacob were writing has been edited by a ghostwriter no one hired. This is Haley's genius. This is Randy's craft. This is Bill's trap snapping closed around his ankle, because even if he exposes the scheme, the damage will be printed on the skin of the people he swore he would protect once he realized what he had lost. The second half of the week tightens like a tourniquet, and it begins with the paperwork Bill thought would save him. The recovered access logs are pristine, too pristine, a gallery of perfect alibis that look like they were curated by someone who studies how truth behaves under fluorescent light. Danny flags a discrepancy in the metadata that any halfway decent intern could have hidden if the goal had been simple fraud. That is the tell. This is not simple fraud. This is humiliation engineered to look sloppy enough for the town to bite and elegant enough to keep biting after the first taste of blood. Randy's fingerprints are nowhere, which is how everyone knows they are everywhere. Jacob, who has managed to keep his temper in a jar all these months, starts negotiating with Dredd like it's a debt collector. He insists on a second round of tests even before anyone suggests the first round is suspect, and the insistence itself widens the crack. Naomi lets it happen because the alternative is to scream into a storm that will only file her voice under hysteria. She moves into a guest room for rest in optics, which is what people call survival when they need a victory they can point to in a mirror. Her phone becomes a museum of advice: take a break from social media, publish a joint statement, name the harassment for what it is, refuse to be shamed into anyone else's timeline. She reads none of it. She counts breaths and watches the clock and memorizes the quiet ways the house has changed since love began to feel like a witness stand. Bill's countermove is money, not because he believes money heals but because money builds rooms where decisions feel cleaner. He retains a crisis firm and assigns them an impossible task: strip the lie of its texture so completely that the town becomes bored. He forgets that boredom here is indistinguishable from anticipation. The firm specializes in charts and bullet points and the anthropology of scandal. They produce a flow of memos that would be laughable if the stakes were not mortal to reputations and livelihoods. They advise him to pivot to philanthropic visibility. He writes checks. He stands on stage. He uses the word community with the tenderness of someone trying not to touch a bruise. Everyone sees what he is doing. Everyone pretends not to. Haley never breaks a sweat. She understands that the worst damage is done by inertia. She drops nothing new because there is no need. The story is self-feeding now. She invests her energy in quiet rewrites of history, reminding the right acquaintances that Naomi once missed an appointment and Jacob once cancelled a meeting and Bill once arrived too early to a private event where his presence had to be explained. She paces the release of sympathy and contempt so that Naomi never knows which version of support she will meet in a hallway. She allows Danny to catch glimpses of a happy future that looked possible if only Danny would stop trying to rescue a man who cannot tell the difference between loyalty and proximity. Randy charts the narrative temperature and opens vents in the right online forums at the right hour. None of it is passionate. All of it is professional. The day of the retest arrives like bad weather that is late enough to ruin an afternoon but not dramatic enough to cancel anything. Jacob's face announces what he will not say, that he has already rehearsed the worst-case scenario in the private theater of a mind that refuses to believe in chance anymore. Naomi signs the forms with hands steady enough to pass any examination except the one that measures the quiet after shame. Bill stays away from the hospital out of respect, which is also fear, which is also strategy. Danny hovers at the edges of this ordeal with the dawning awareness that she has become a supporting character in a story she did not audition for. She once believed that survival meant holding the right hand at the right time. Now she understands that sometimes the right hand is the one you are not allowed to take. When the results return, they do not deliver the clean ending anyone prayed for. They deliver questions wrapped in certainty. Someone has tampered with the chain of custody. The signatures are real. The timestamps are suspicious in a way that will never be proved to a standard that soothes hearts. The official conclusion demands repetition of protocols. Unofficially, the town accepts the result that makes for the best whisper. Naomi breaks, not in public, not catastrophically, but in the subtle ways that matter. She stops planning the nursery, she reshelves the baby name book, she avoids mirrors because they record not just faces but timelines. Jacob hardens, which looks like focus but is actually grief with a mission. He begins to believe that the only way to save his family is to choose an enemy he can punch, and Haley is too nimble for that. Bill will do. Bill has made mistakes loud enough to serve as a scapegoat, and Jacob needs a scapegoat so he can keep breathing. Bill recognizes the pivot and does not fight it. He accepts blame as a currency he can spend now to buy an absolution that might arrive later. He returns to the clinic records and finds the one detail that pushes him from fury into despair: a recurring service code tied to consultations about legal guardianship, opened under a placeholder that matches a nickname Naomi used once years ago in a charity group chat Haley moderated. It is a breadcrumb many steps removed from anything concrete, but it is enough for Bill to see the architecture of the trap. Haley left a trail designed to be discovered, one that whispers that Bill tried to position himself near the child as a backstop, a caretaker, a safety net woven without consent. The story is monstrous in how plausible it sounds to those who hate him and intoxicating in how defensible it sounds to those who love him with reservations. Vanessa, who has spent this entire disaster trying to keep blood pressure and board votes stable, gambles on a public reset. She arranges an event where compassion can be staged, where support can be quantified by the size of a check and the grace of an embrace. It is a beautiful evening until Joey receives a package he cannot resist opening and a screen lights up with footage no one can contextualize quickly enough to control. A hallway. A brief exchange. A door held open. It could be anyone doing anything benign. The caption does the work. Trust is the first casualty. Naomi leaves early without saying goodbye. Jacob follows too late. Bill stays because leaving would be admission and staying looks like courage to anyone who needs to believe in a version of him that does not exist this week. Night lands heavy. Danny drives without destination until the city gives way to the kind of quiet that makes memory unspool. She remembers the first moment she mistook momentum for safety, the first time she told herself that rescuing a man would fix the part of her that loves fire. She turns around because she cannot outrun the work she still owes herself. Back at Fairmont Crest, Bill finds a small box on his doorstep, the final beat in a symphony of minor cruelties. Inside is a rattle engraved with a date that predates everything by exactly the amount of time necessary to transform suspicion into myth. He understands immediately that it is not evidence, it is a curse, a keepsake from a future Haley wants him to believe he has already stolen. The week ends not with answers but with triage. Naomi checks into the hospital for precautionary monitoring after a bout of stress that any woman carrying hope would recognize as a warning. The baby's rhythm steadies under watchful eyes. The medical staff speaks in calm phrases about rest and hydration and the plain math of care. Outside the room, Jacob bargains with whatever force still believes in him, even if that force is nothing more mystical than his own exhausted will. Bill sits in a chair down the hall and stares at his hands as if they belong to someone who can put something back once it is shattered. Danny sends a message she deletes before it can do harm or good. Haley sleeps early. Randy schedules 2 posts for tomorrow morning and sets a reminder to water the plants. By the time dawn arrives, the damage is complete enough to feel permanent and unfinished enough to demand another week of watching. The town will draw new maps and then redraw them after lunch. The clinic will issue a statement and then revise it. The blogger will publish a thread that reads like truth even as it frays at every edge. Bill will decide that contrition is cheaper than war until he remembers that nothing here stays inexpensive for long. Naomi will keep breathing and counting. Jacob will look for a fight that is not a mirror. Danny will promise herself that this is the last time she mistakes adrenaline for meaning. And Haley, who knows exactly what she wants, will wait to another day where she is already 10 moves ahead, the board rearranged so completely that even victories look like concessions. This is how despair settles in at Fairmont Crest, quietly, professionally, with just enough mercy to keep everyone alive for the next act. And that's where we pause. Fairmont Crest looks still on the surface, but the undercurrent hisses through every crack. Bill has stacked evidence like sandbags, yet water keeps seeping from details too perfect to be coincidence. Naomi listens to the tiny heartbeat and learns to breathe beneath suspicious stares. Jacob hunts for an enemy with a face, though what he may grasp is only his own shadow. Danny, for the first time, sees the thin line between saving someone and losing herself. And Haley doesn't run, she adjusts the board millimeter by millimeter while Randy tends the fire so rumor burns steady. Next week, which envelope arrives, an answer or a more sophisticated loop? If the records are real, Bill is trapped. If they're forged, he's still imprisoned inside the story people want to believe. Naomi may be cleared, but the social scars will remain. If results are delayed again, silence becomes a verdict. Drop your theories, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because at Fairmont Crest, the darkest answers show up in broad daylight.